I'm going to talk about the problem space that full fact is in, the challenge that we're trying to deal with, and the role that technology plays in that. Alex is then going to introduce what that tech looks like in practice and some of the technological challenges we're facing while trying to tackle a set of social challenges that I think we are all slightly too aware of. In a world with more information than ever before, paradoxically, it's become harder than ever to know what to trust. And all around us, people are exploiting that for political, personal, or financial gain. Bad information does ruin lives. It damages people's health, it promotes hate, and it hurts democracy. I hardly need to point out the damage to people's health that's happened over the last year due to false claims about the pandemic, or even uncertainty about the pandemic. Sometimes when you need to make a decision which can be life-saving for you, your family, your friends, simply uncertainty is enough to do real damage. Actually, the infodemic, the term the World Health Organization uses for it, is not a new challenge as such. When the World Health Organization named vaccine hesitancy as one of the top 10 global health challenges before the pandemic even started, it was partly with misinformation and misunderstandings about vaccines as one of the causes for concern. Bad information damages people's health. Bad information promotes hate. Sadly, we've seen in recent years people who have gone online, become radicalized, been told stories about other communities and gone on to attack and to do dangerous violent crime, to attack and kill MPs even. This is the strongest, most violent form of a general phenomenon of the difficulties of polite, constructive debate online, and actually thinking about how we make good public debate happen in an environment where it's easy and cheap to aggravate is a really hard challenge. And bad information hurts democracy. We've seen in recent years so much of what we would normally take for granted, the ability to have a free and fair vote in this country, in the United States, and in other places, called into question by people who challenge the idea that processes are done fairly, sometimes led by misinformation to that conclusion, sometimes coming from the very top of our democracy. So we're living in a time when information has changed fundamentally, and it's changing the way we think about information and think about misinformation too. When we started Full Fact, we launched in 2010 after a couple of years of trying to build it up. And those days, you could make a list of every time people talked about politics where they had a large audience. You named sort of 10 newspapers, 5 TV channels. You could name all of the relevant TV shows. You could pretty much name the radio shows too, off the top of your head. That is an unrecognizable world from the one we are now in, where Facebook is one of the top 3 sources of news in the country. The largest source of news, by the way, is still television. These changes that we're seeing, we are only part way through, but they are already transforming the work that Full Fact started doing 10 years ago, when we were mainly focused on abuses of power by politicians and the media. Now we're trying to understand how misinformation that is sometimes seeded by very powerful people, including state actors, but is sometimes just generated in a grassroots way by people trying to help each other by providing good health information, but getting it wrong. How do you respond to that challenge? How much in a free society should we regard that as a problem that needs solving? People in a country with freedom of expression have the freedom to be wrong. You don't always need somebody jumping in to tell you you are wrong, any more than you needed somebody to leap across the bar in a pub a generation ago to correct you as you sipped your pint and chatted with your mate. So our job at Full Fact is to try to work out what proportionate responses to the real harms caused by bad information look like, and then try to make them available to people. And we do that in a few different ways. The first is fact-checking, the thing we're best known for. Last year, 20 million users came to Full Fact's website looking for trustworthy information. That number has been so high during the pandemic, double what it was the year before, even with the general election in 2019. The thirst for trustworthy information on a topic which affects all of our lives has been really important. But we don't just stop at being an information provider. The next thing we do is we ask people to correct the record when they make mistakes, whether they're the Prime Minister, whether they're an influencer online, whether they're major newspapers. And that's really important. You can't always avoid making mistakes. Whoever you are, however well briefed you are, full fact makes mistakes. But when we make mistakes, which we try to avoid as much as possible by double checking everything we put out, 2 separate fact checkers look at everything we put out. But when we do make mistakes, we acknowledge it openly. We publish a correction. We add it to the list of corrections on our website, and we try to get the true story out there. And that's a reasonable thing to expect from people who command large audiences, but it's not something that always consistently happens. And that's why we do the third thing. We fact check, we correct the record, or we ask people to, and then we look at when this doesn't happen. Who fails to get their facts right? Who misleads other people? Who fails to correct the record when they need to, and why? And we look at where you can make systemic changes that help inform public debate better. One of the things we're pointing out at the moment is there's just no mechanism for an ordinary MP to correct the record if they make a mistake in the House of Commons. It's as if the system assumes they're all perfect. I think, and I know from experience, that MPs will readily admit they're not perfect. When we've asked them to correct the record, many of them have done so. But actually, the only way they can do it is by interrupting a later debate and just saying, a few days ago, I made a mistake, and I need to tell you what the reality is. Now, that's in no way linked to the original error. It in no way corrects the record in the sense of anyone looking at the record of the previous thing, but that's what they're stuck with. So a simple example of how we're trying to improve the systems in public life is asking MPs to create a system so they can correct the record. Not a big ask, but an important one. Perhaps more significantly, we're the reason the Daily Mail has a corrections column, and the Sun followed suit shortly after they created theirs. That was after a long series of fact checks we did, and with the Leveson inquiry in the background, encouraging them to take seriously that challenge. So we fact check, we ask people to correct the record, and then we look at the systems in public life and we point out where they could be strengthened so that we can all be better informed and be protected against people who would choose to mislead us. And then the internet comes along, and anybody can command a massive audience, and people can seem like what they're not. You can have deliberate disinformation campaigns created by corporations. Think the long history of tobacco disinformation, for example, or by nation states. Think about the example of the poisonings in Salisbury, or by essentially groups of people who are quite nihilistic. Anyone who's familiar with 4chan will be familiar with their joy in just essentially making trouble some of the time. And sometimes that has a dark side. I talked about promoting hate earlier. When the Notre Dame Cathedral caught fire on 4chan, people decided to create images of a group of Muslims laughing in front of a fire, completely fictitious, but spread online, promoting hate against Muslims in the context of that event, which was so significant to people in France and beyond. Similarly, when this pandemic started, among all the other misinformation about people's health and all of the important choices we all had to make in a very uncertain world, we also saw old hates resurrected. We saw, for example, claims that Jewish people had a vaccine that they just weren't sharing with the rest of the country. And that kind of thing spreading online can do real harm. So our challenge over the last few years has been thinking about how do you tackle misinformation at internet scale? And looking at the pandemic over the last year, working with fact checkers in other countries, we've been able to see the same claim pop up, start in France, then go on to Italy, then go on to Spain, then end up in the UK a couple of weeks later. You can see it coming. And the question is, what can you do about it? And particularly, what can you do about it in a free society? Over the last few years, the internet companies have come to Full Fact asking to work with us to try to tackle misinformation online. Google integrates Full Fact's fact checks directly into search results. So instead of just seeing the title and as a link, as you normally do with a web page, you can actually see the claim and conclusion from our fact checks directly embedded into Google. That's started to be integrated into YouTube searches too now. Facebook integrates Full Fact's work in a slightly different way. They have something called the third-party fact-checking program. and they actually pay us to do fact checking of content they've identified on Facebook that they think might be false. We choose what we fact check. We publish the fact checks openly on our website, but then they do something interesting. Firstly, they show users who are seeing the content we fact checked on Facebook a link to our fact check. You don't have to read it, you can ignore it, but it's there to prompt you to think about the accuracy of what you're seeing. Secondly, if you go to share that piece of content, it will tell you this has been fact checked. Are you sure you want to share? It will ask. Now, again, you don't have to read the fact check, you don't have to pay attention to it, and if you want to share something, you can. But that prompt at the point of the decision, whether to share or not, gives people an option to make a better informed decision. And that's a powerful and free speech-based approach. And then they do something else, and this is their choice. They choose to integrate fact checks into their ranking, so that if something has been fact checked and found to be false, it will be less likely to appear higher up your feed or on your feed. And they say, we cannot independently verify this, that reduces the spread of false claims by about 80% compared to if it has not been ranked in that way. So full fact is now part of an ecosystem of attempts to understand misinformation through our research work and our policy work, to inform people about it through our fact checking, and to respond to it. And importantly, to do that at internet scale. And that's where our technology came in. We started working on how tech could help us scale and target our work about 5 or 6 years ago. And we were lucky a few years ago to win a Google AI for Social Good global challenge. So about more than 1,000 organizations from more than 100 countries applied for this competition to demonstrate a use of artificial intelligence for social good. We chose the challenge of misinformation, working with partners Africa, which works in 4 African countries, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, and South Africa, and Chequeado, which works in Argentina but runs a network of fact checkers all across Latin America. And with the Open Data Institute based here in the UK, we put a pitch together of ways to tackle bad information. Alex is going to tell you about the kind of technology we're building and how we go about building it, how we apply machine learning based on the domain expertise we have to build reliable training data sets to then scale up our work. And the thing to bear in mind in this context is, although we are doing work like this, so are lots of other people behind closed doors. National security agencies, governments around the world, both democratic governments and others, and internet companies and VC-funded startups are working on technology like this. And by and large, that technology is in no way transparent. It is not like Full Fact, a charity which has an obligation to work for the public benefit, to talk about the work we're doing and be transparent about it. Full Fact is doing this work because it will make our work more effective. But we are also doing it because it is critically important that there exists an organization that is non-profit, that exists for the public benefit, that has a serious understanding of this technology and can help people work out how to scrutinize this technology when it is applied. And I'll give you just one example of why before I hand over. Last year, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, which is, among other things, responsible for the internet regulation bill that's coming out, the online safety bill, was reported as having summoned the internet companies to his office to tell them about 5G misinformation and tell them to do something about it. Now, these reports were exaggerated, but they were based on his staff's briefing. That was actually a regular meeting with the internet companies, officials from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and civil society organizations involved in tackling disinformation. I was in the meeting, but nonetheless, this was how they proudly briefed it to the press, that the government had summoned the internet companies to tell them that there was a category of misinformation and tell them to take it off the internet. And some of the internet companies have changed their terms and conditions to say that you cannot spread 5G misinformation that claims that telecoms will cause health damage when there's no basis for that, which has led to harassment of telecoms workers and attacks on telecoms facilities. You know, this has serious consequences. But nonetheless, we've been tracking how many people have seen that misinformation since that intervention by the government. Ofcom do a survey. They use our fact checks as a source for that survey. And one of the things they've been tracking is the prevalence of 5G misinformation. In the week that this kicked off, 50% of people said that they had seen misinformation about 5G in the past week. About 20 weeks later, from memory, you'd have to double check this, it was only 13% of people. Now that is a dramatic intervention in public debate, and it's something that deserves real scrutiny. And Full Fact is part of the effort to provide that scrutiny, as well as to use technology for good to help us do the work we do, scrutinizing people in power for the way they use information. I'm really proud to work with Alex and a fantastic automated fact-checking team who've put their efforts into this and worked incredibly hard over the last couple of years to build genuinely groundbreaking technology. So I'll hand over to Alex now to tell you about it.
Thanks, Will. Chris, can you see that okay? Or
yes, we're fine.
1 second. Can you still see it?
Yes, Alex, you're good to go.
Perfect. Okay, let's get into some automated fact checking. So first of all, allow me to introduce the AFC team.
Sorry, Alex, you've now got a grey box over the PowerPoint.
Okay. What about now?
Yeah, it's great, thanks.
Okay. Perfect. So allow me to introduce the AFC team. We're a small team of 6. Among us, we have data scientists, developers, and a product manager. And we have experience ranging from time spent in the BBC and companies such as Expedia, and a bit of time spent in academia. I myself come from a computer science background. Before Full Fact, I worked in the defense industry in AI research, conducting AI research for the Ministry of Defense. So within the AFC team, we very much see our role as one of support. We're not trying to replace our fact checkers with technology or AI. We very much see human fact checkers working side by side with technology and AI models to combat misinformation as effectively as possible. So there are 2 ways that we support our fact checkers. Number 1, we help them check claims as quickly as possible. And number 2, we help them spot repetitions of claims that they've already fact checked. Most of the work in AFC revolves around Full Fact Alpha. As Will mentioned before, Alpha was created in collaboration with Africa Check, and some volunteers from Google. And it contains a number of tools that help our fact checkers do their jobs. So in a second, I'm going to talk a bit more about the technology behind Alpha. But first, I thought a nice little demonstration would be a good way to start things off. So here you can see Alpha being used to fact check one of Boris Johnson's press conferences. It's transcribing the press conference using speech-to-text technologies and adding a label to each sentence. I'm going to talk a bit more about these labels in a second, but they help our fact checkers find key information. Here you can see Alpha finding a sentence that we've already fact checked. This is good. That means we can combat this particular instance of misinformation that much quicker. And ultimately, this leads to a tweet being published much quicker than it would have without Alpha and without our AI tools. So before we get into the technology behind Alpha, first some definitions. Machine learning. Machine learning is the science of getting computers to act without being explicitly programmed. And then we have a specific machine learning model called BERT, which was trained on a large corpus of text, including all of English Wikipedia. So you can imagine it knows a lot about the structure and meaning of written text. And then finally, we have a claim. A claim is an assertion that something is true. And each of the fact checks that Full Fact publish are in response to a certain claim. So how do we help our fact checkers check claims as quickly as possible. First of all, we put all the UK's media, or most of the UK's media, in one place. This allows our fact checkers to focus in one place and not have to monitor the plethora of media outlets. Then we take it a step further. So most sentences that we scrape from the UK media aren't in fact claims. And of the ones that are, only 30% of them are fact checkable. So what we've created is a claim detection AI model that is able to filter out the sentences that aren't fact checkable, so that our fact checkers can find the ones that are quickly and efficiently. So we trained our AI to assign one of 10 labels to a sentence, 3 of which are shown on the right here. First of all, we have quantity. A quantity claim is one that is referring to a current value or a change in quantity. These sort of claims are very suitable for fact checking because they contain concrete statements and numbers that we can easily falsify. And then we have predictions and personal experience claims, which are very hard to fact check. For example, personal experience claims are usually opinions, which is something that we don't really have a say on. And we've created our claim detection model by first creating a data set of labeled sentences, and then taking a BERT model that I mentioned previously and training it on that data set. And the BERT model was able to accurately assign labels to sentences. And our claim detection tools are already being used in production, and they're being used by a large amount of our fact-checking network. And they've already managed to boost the number of detected claims by 1,000 times, which ultimately means misinformation is found and corrected. The second way we support our fact checkers is to know when someone says something that they've already fact checked. Our fact checkers are a premium resource. Each fact check takes a large amount of time to research and produce. And we're really trying to get the maximum use out of each of our fact checks as possible. Add to that the fact that there's so much misinformation out there. Often the instances of misinformation are things that we've already fact checked. We want to be able to quickly find those repetitions so that we can push for corrections and remove as much misinformation as possible. So we're using AI to do this. Just to give you a bit of background into the problem of finding repetitions, or claim matching as we call it. So we're scanning 100,000 sentences to see if any of them match our fact check claims a day. Of those sentences, 0 to 10 of those will be matches, which means 99% of the sentences are not matches and can be safely ignored. As you can imagine, it's an excruciatingly time-consuming process to go through 100,000 sentences, and it's more than any one human or even a team of humans can do, which is why we're turning to AI to help us do this. So we're using a collection of AI models together to solve the problem of claim matching. First of all, we have a model called Sentence BERT, which is a variant of the BERT model I mentioned previously. Sentence BERT was created specifically to understand the difference and similarities in terms of meaning between two sentences. And we call that semantic similarity or semantic representation. On the right here, I have a little example of what that means. So, how are you and how old are you are two semantically different claims, even though they contain many of the same words. And then we have how old are you and what is your age, which are semantically similar. They have the same meaning, but they have very different words. So you can see that this is a very tough problem for an AI model to solve, but SentenceBERT excels at this. Then we're combining our SentenceBERT model with a topic detection model. This topic detection model was trained to recognize the topic that a sentence is talking about or referring to, and it's able to recognize 41 topics. Then finally, we have our entity extraction model, where an entity is a distinct, independent being. And we compare the entities in two sentences to see how many overlap. And what we're finding is none of these models excel individually, but together we're seeing very positive results and we're making better predictions. Oh, that's a shame. Anyway, so our tools are already effective, but we still have ground to cover. So our tools have been used to fact check party manifestos in the UK. And over in Argentina, over half of the claims that are fact checked have been found using our AI tools. Finally, I would like to say that we have a sentence matching API coming soon, which makes use of our claim matching technology. Soon, developers will be able to connect to our API and upload a collection of sentences that we will then scan the various media sentences that we scrape for matches. And that's all. Thank you for listening, and Will and I will be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Will and Alex. It's an incredibly insightful set of thoughts that you've raised with us this evening. In terms of the artificial intelligence tools, how do you see its evolution progressing in the coming years, particularly with a view to full fact's role, people within full fact, and obviously that human element that currently, and quite rightly, is so pivotal to what you do?
Will, do you want to say this?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that we're right at the cutting edge of this kind of technology. And in fact, we presented it to a team from the Chief Technology Officer's office in one of the major internet companies, and they said, you're doing stuff that we're not doing yet. So right at the cutting edge, because we're in, one specific niche. So we don't quite know what's around the corner. How could you possibly? And this is definitely, there is a sort of act of faith here. It's partly recognizing that every field is going to be transformed by computers sooner or later, and we'd rather try to be in the driving seat than wait to be run over. That said, we think it will come in a few different places. As Alex has said, that you can sort of distinguish the different elements of the system and then start thinking about where they will make the most difference. So if you take, for example, claim detection, does this block of text contain a claim or not, or essentially can a fact checker ignore it or not? That's a really useful functionality. And one of the things we know we need to do, because we have so much ground to cover, is apply that to different inputs. So we've recently added live radio to the set of things we can ingest by live speech to text recognition. So if you're on the Today program now, you're being watched by Facebook. If you're on the Today program now, you're being watched by Full Fact, whether we've got out of bed or not. So partly it's about bringing more stuff into the system. It's partly about strengthening the accuracy of the tools. So for us at the moment, in machine learning accuracy, as you may well know, there's often a trade-off between precision and recall. And precision is most of the things that we get are the right things that we should have got, and recall is we've got most of the things that we should have got. We're not missing things that we should be getting. At the moment, we're most worried about precision. we want to make sure that what the machine returns is useful to us. But ultimately, because giving our team a massive pile of stuff with only a few needles in the haystack, it is no good when we're trying to save them time. But ultimately, we need to get the precision up and then expand the recall to make it more robust. And as Alex demonstrated in his talk, actually, because of the semantic complexity, that's really hard to do. It's one thing when it's how old are you, what is your age? It's another thing when it's GDP has gone up by 7% over the last 3 years, and this has been caused by the government's irresponsible policies in response to the pandemic, or down, or whatever. The average sentence in Hansard is tens of words long. One of the things we found early on in this is that repetitions of the same sentence structure are really rare. So whatever we do is going to have to be pretty smart. So the expansion from precision to recall is a really hard technical challenge. And claim matching, by the way, to give you a sense of just how difficult it is, Facebook were embarrassed, and Facebook have several thousand data scientists. Facebook were embarrassed recently by a news article pointing out that they were taking down posts referencing the place Plymouth Hoe because they had reached the conclusion that place name was somehow rude. It's really easy to run this tech in a way that accidentally does damage. And what we're trying to do is be really, really precise about the impacts of this tech, whilst also pushing the limits of what the tech can do. And that is the dance we will be doing over the next few years. I suppose the other thing I should say is we committed to thinking global about this from the beginning. We're very aware that we are privileged to live in a country that has support for this. We have 2,000 people donating to us every month, making this possible. We were able to win support from Google. We are English language, which is best supported by the technology. We want to make sure that we are building tools that can be internationalized and made available to the hundreds of fact-checking organizations all over the world. So that's one of our long-term goals, is to pioneer this, but then share it as best we can. That was a long answer, but then it's a hard question. Alex, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just like to add that, so we'll mention the problem of precision versus recall. So with claim matching, this is something that we've been working hard at, and it's a very difficult problem. We've been able to get some of the way there, but we do recognise we've got a long way to go to get to where we truly want to be.
So you're not worried about some sort of nightmarish scenario in which every cell phone on the country is a big brother listening and truth fact checking everything that you say at all times?
Well, I think you can imagine a world in which fact checking in some circumstances becomes a bit more like spell checking. So we are what we call robo-checking. That branch of our tools will automatically recognize a sentence like the economy has grown by 3% in the last year, know where to get the data to check that, go off to the Office for National Statistics API, download it, check that claim, and let you know whether it's true or not with no human intervention. You can imagine a world in which you use it, as Alex said, to augment humans, to make it easier for us to be accurate, because by and large, most of us don't want to mislead people. So there's a sense in actually ubiquitous fact-checking being of value to us. But this goes back to the democratic accountability thing. That's on the user side, letting people choose what they say and what they share for themselves. If you turn that around and say, put it on the government side and the government gets to choose what we can see or share, then it becomes frankly dangerous. And again, this is part of why we want to be at the cutting edge of this. I regularly give evidence to parliamentary inquiries and that kind of thing in this area. And recently there was an inquiry by a House of Lords Select Committee on fact-checking and freedom of expression, which is just brilliant. They were asking exactly the questions we should be asking ahead of legislation in this area. So actually, ubiquitous fact-checking could be good, could be terrifying. And in a democracy, it's up to all of us to do our bit to decide which way that ends up going.
In terms of, you mentioned the competition. You mentioned that there are a plethora of international fact-checking agencies. And obviously, it's certainly become apparent to me that media organizations, since the last US presidential election, or sorry, the one before last, I should say, have been falling over each other with statements about their own inter-house fact-checking services and the length that they're going to. Does Full Fact view that as helpful, as a positive step? Can these organizations, these in-house services, be trusted, or is it all potentially part of the propaganda?
Well, it could go either way. In the UK, I think we are lucky. We have quite a tightly regulated, actually, broadcast news media, and they are accountable through Ofcom for the accuracy of what they say. And the two media-based fact-checking teams in the UK are BBC Reality Check and Channel 4 Fact Check, which actually started before Full Fact. And people can, in any decent fact-checking, see the sources that are being used to make their own minds up about the accuracy of what they're getting from those services. But by and large, our view is that good quality fact-checking is on our side, and we're very happy to have more people fighting on the side of trying to hold power to account and get accuracy in public debate. The competition is the people who want to mislead people. And actually, good journalism is part of the antidote to that. Good researchers communicating their work are part of the antidote to that. Politicians who take care to be accurate and who correct the record when they make mistakes are part of the answer to that. So, Full Fact does not want to stand alone trying to kind of keep the world honest. Actually, almost all of us want public life to be honest. And there are lots and lots of parts of what's necessary to make that happen.
So, going back in time, the last war, this used to be just called propaganda, didn't it? We've branded it fake news and misinformation and come up with all sorts of terms. Do you think this is a newly evolved phenomenon that the internet is heightening, or is it just a modern take on an old problem that's actually about as bad as it ever has been?
It's a bit of both. When you ask people, when the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford asked people in focus groups, what do you think of when you hear the term fake news? People think politicians lying to us, and people think bad journalism. That's what they say. And neither of those is a new thing. The actual term fake news originated in describing a group of Macedonian teenagers who had decided to literally make up some news and stick it on a website so that they could get advertising revenue. Now that is novel. Macedonian teenagers did not generally used to be able to pump out news that was widely read in other countries and make a living doing it. So there are new things here, and the democratization of communications is new and powerful. And I think the biggest difference, and what goes to the heart of why Alex's work is so important, is that it's possible to reach a large audience without that being very visible to the rest of the country anymore. So it used to be that if you wanted to reach millions of people, you needed to get in the newspaper, which lots of people read, whether you were trying to reach them or not. Or you had to get in the news on TV, or you had to take out adverts. And actually, to get in the newspaper or on TV, you had to go through somebody asking you awkward questions. And to take out an advert on a billboard or something, at least everyone could see it and argue back. But now it's possible to target messaging at millions of people while skipping talking to the rest of the country. And we see this in elections. It's exactly what election campaigners do because, of course, it's cost effective. But what it erodes is the idea of democracy as a shared experience. And what it makes harder is accountability for us as voters against them as candidates. So part of what Alex and the team's work is doing is creating transparency, not because things are necessarily even hidden in terms of deliberately hidden away, but because they're hidden amongst so much noise that it's very hard to see what's going on. And I think that is a novel part of the problem. But you're absolutely right that it's important to recognize not all of this is new. And the question of how do you build trust is one with a long history. There wasn't some golden era that we need to try to get back to. We just need to understand how this is a different challenge now.
Do you think that full facts and others are actually winning the war?
No.
That's a very definite answer.
I'm sorry, I don't. If you look at the last 10 years, we have done some really important work. You know, the Daily Mail setting up a corrections column is a significant change in a very powerful institution. We have had the rules changed to say that government ministers cannot selectively release official statistics. They have to be released by the official statisticians with independent commentary, with the caveats and so on. That was a really important intervention to prevent government propaganda at our expense. So we have found ways we can improve things. But no one could look at the last few years and do anything but recognize that it has got easier to bullshit. It's got easier in terms of the number of opportunities. It's got easier in terms of a lower cost. And it's partly easy because most of us expect politicians to lie most of the time. Sadly, 80% of us generally don't trust politicians to tell the truth. And so if we have these low expectations, there's sort of no cost for a politician living down to those low expectations. And we've really got to think carefully about what we are all willing to put up with if we're going to have an antidote. As you said, you know, fake news has been the buzzword for the last few years. It's massively affected democratic decisions in the UK and the US and around the world. And the ease with which politicians can get mass messages out and bypass scrutiny should be seen as a challenge to all of us as citizens in a democracy. And if you don't believe me about the UK, talk to other fact checkers in other countries, talk to Argentina, where for years they had inflation statistics, core economic statistics that simply couldn't be trusted, that were deliberately manipulated. Talk to fact checkers in the Philippines who are harassed and jailed by the autocratic president there. You know, there is real, this is, full fact plays a hugely modest part in this, but globally, this is a core frontier in the battle to live in a free and open society.
From your lengthy experience now, well, what would be the most insidious example of manipulation or misinformation that your full fact team have uncovered?
I'm going to go back a long way on that one. I think that is a value judgment, and fact checkers can't make your value judgments for you. So this is my personal opinion, and I'm sure if you asked everybody in our office, people would name other things, and that's fine. There isn't a right answer. But it was one of the things I saw very early on shocked me, which was just 2011, there was a welfare reform bill going through Parliament. There was an attempt essentially to reduce the benefits bill. And in order to create the sort of political environment to make that a popular move, there was a series of leaks to the newspapers, or briefings to the newspapers, I should say, where official statistics that hadn't been published were being given to the newspapers without any context whatsoever. So one day you'd get headlines saying that, however many people were on disability benefits because they were alcoholics. One day you get a claim that 2/3 of people who are on disability benefits were actually fit to work. And consistently, these claims turned out to be false or misleading. And in fact, it became such a consistent pattern that we reported it to the Leveson inquiry into press standards, and they concluded that sections of the press were prioritizing their political agenda over accuracy in publishing these kinds of stories. We reported it to the cross-party select committee in the House of Commons on work and pensions, and they actually questioned ministers about it and asked why they weren't doing more to challenge this misinformation. And it was a deliberate feeding of false information and misleading information to the public in order to create a political effect for the government of the day, which, going back to what you said earlier, Chris, is propaganda. And with the Leveson inquiry and the Department for Work and Pensions Select Committee and the UK Statistics Authority stepping in and saying you can't release statistics like this, the for legal code of practice for official statistics forbids it, it was possible to sort of put a lid on this. And I say sort of advisedly, not stop it completely, but challenge it enough to impede it. But it was a very clear, deliberate, sustained over months attempt to manipulate public opinion with bad information. And that's our government. Those are the people we vote for, or maybe not for, but they act in our name. So I think, online we talk a lot about misinformation. It actually often is ordinary people talking to ordinary people. We must remember that actually the government shouldn't get involved in ordinary people talking to ordinary people unless there's a very good reason. But when it's power of the governments being abused in that way, I find that insidious. And of course, people on disability benefits, by and large, aren't so well equipped to fight back against that kind of misrepresentation. They've got enough to deal with in their day-to-day lives, people who have really severe disabilities that stop them working and so on. So I found that a moving example, actually. I got an email from a woman at that time who told me that disabled people are afraid to leave their home. She said, my carer reads the Daily Mail. She believes what's in it is true. And we're afraid of being attacked. We're being spat at in the street and so on. And it's a good reminder that you can go from arguments about how official statistics are being released to people's day-to-day lives and people living in fear in an amazingly short jump.
So part of the package of full facts is that our politicians now know that full facts are there and they are listening. And presumably after the Levinson inquiry, they started to become aware that they were being watched, they're being monitored, and their standards have improved. So do you think that would fly in this country now?
Well, in that particular case, I can tell you that the head of profession for statistics in that department got given a key performance indicator of making sure the department wasn't criticised by full fact. So that's some indication that these institutions are subject to public pressure and public accountability. And when we all, the citizens in democracy, pay attention, it does actually matter. We have to be constantly vigilant. It's not a one-time battle. The personnel change on each side, and we have to keep our side of that up. But it's not one-way traffic. We can push back. We can hold people to account, and we can make a difference. So yes, I think people are more aware of being scrutinized. And we've had David Cameron publish a correction on the record when he was a prime minister as a result of our fact checking. So even number 10 will pay attention to what we do at least some of the time. But it does depend on all of us. And, as I say, there are now thousands of people supporting full fact, and it matters. We are not just a small group of people now. We are part of a crowd of people who care about honest and accurate information, and that makes a difference. And by the way, the work that Alex is doing, we talk about scrutiny, but this is why claim matching is so important. It's one thing, we publish, say, 500 fact checks last year done by human beings, but actually they relate to claims being made thousands of times. What Alex is doing is making sure we can pick up every one of those thousands of times, not just the hundreds of times that we've actually fact checked. And that makes all the difference, so that they know that wherever they're talking, whether there's a fact checker in the room or not, there can still be a fact checker in the room in the way that makes a difference.
So Alex, what are you currently working on with full fact? What's your next innovation going to be?
So we're constantly working on claim matching. As you can imagine, the sort of cutting edge of AI is constantly moving and improving. So which means we can constantly improve our models with that, with those sort of developments. But right now, I'm talking in the last week or so, I have just begun to shift my focus to robo checking, which Will mentioned earlier, which is basically fully automated fact checking. We're trying to build a system where a user can submit a query, like Will said, is unemployment rising? and then our AI will go away, find the relevant information, and then return the full facts to that user in seconds. That's what we're aiming for, and we hope to be able to share that with you in the near future.
Are you using neurolinguistic processing as part of what you're doing?
Yes, we are. Yeah. That's out of the sort of AI subdomains, NLP is the one we use the most. I think I would even go as far as to say 90% of our AI models are neural linguistic models.
Okay. And that's being captured, Will mentioned the Today program. So you're automatically harvesting this into a consumable data format and then feeding it through your algorithms, which, if you're looking at television, audio, sounds like an awful lot of data to be capturing. So what sort of data processing power and storage does Full Fact have at its disposal, and how do you scale that?
So this is a bit outside of my area of expertise, but we are using obviously massive amounts of storage. As I mentioned earlier, we're processing 100,000 sentences a day, which means we've got essentially massive servers that are handling all that data processing for us. We take the sentences in from the UK media outlets, and then we put them through a process of enrichment, adding things like semantic labels and other things, which help us with our downstream fact checking. And I think all of this is made possible thanks to some generous cloud credits that have been donated to us, and that all makes our jobs a lot easier.
The tools that Full Fact specifically generates, are they proprietary to Full Fact, or are they public domain material? Do you share them with other fact-checking agencies?
Would you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, so at the moment they're in use on 3 continents by Afc Team, Chequiado, and Full Fact, and we tested them out with a few other fact-checking organizations. Our long-term goal is to make them available to other organizations that, if you like, are on our side, other public benefit fact-checking organizations. But the thing about fact-checking is it's an adversarial process. If you invent a good way to fact-check, people who want to mislead you will try and find a way around it. And so we're in kind of the same situation as kind of Google is with their search algorithm, that if you show people exactly how you're doing what you're doing, it becomes very hard to do what you're doing. So our code, by and large, is not open source. But as Alex mentioned at the end of his talk, we're looking at opening up APIs to some of our code to let other developers use these tools and apply them. So it's trying to balance that. We are part of an open ecosystem. We are sort of by mentality, we want to be open. We're a charity. We are part of a hostile environment with genuine adversarial actors out there who would like to misuse this kind of technology. So it's trying to get the balance between those two. It is a tricky thing for us.
So it sounds absolutely incredible to think of this really as an arms race. That sounds to me like what you've just described. It is literally an arms race between Full Fact and malignant actors.
It is, and actually it's also an arms race in another sense. I don't know if you've heard of PA Radar. PA is the press association, the newswire service. They've got a service called Radar, which uses natural language generation, the opposite of NLP, or I suppose technically a branch of NLP, but i.e. what they do is they ingest some data about, say, the sports scores in your local area, and they turn that into a piece of journalism, 500-word story about, oh, it was very exciting in the first half, there were 3 goals scored and this kind of thing. Essentially a very fancy form of template filling in, and you end up with a news story. And what we're doing in our robo-checking work is essentially the opposite of that. Take a news story, figure out what the data behind it must have been, and work out whether that data was right. So we're going to see more and more journalism, which is automatically generated, whether it's breaking financial news or hyper-localized sports news and that kind of thing. And as that happens, again, it's just making this haystack bigger and bigger that we've got to deal with. And it is by and large easier to create than to disassemble and understand the sources of information. So that's our other arms race. As journalism itself starts being automated and more important content gets automatically generated, can the automatic understanding and analysis of that content keep up?
So just before we start to conclude, taking it down to its simplest level, you're a member of our audience tonight. What is Full Fact's top tips on how to spot bad information?
If you go to fullfact.org/toolkit, you can find them. But the first thing is, what's the source? Try and trace it back to its original source and find out whether that is reliable or not. And obviously, a Google search can help you do that. A reverse image search can help you do that. Recognizing that on social media, things can be rebadged very easily. The second is, what's it really saying? Look behind the headline. We see, depressingly, people sharing our own fact checks without even reading them, and actually just going that one step further to see what's behind the headline. Is there corroborating detail? Is there something that makes you doubt it? That's really important. But the third thing, and actually the most important thing, is how does it make you feel? Typically, misinformation that's designed to manipulate you plays on your emotions. It tries to wind you up. It tries to make you angry. It tries to make you fearful. And if you've seen any of the stuff about COVID, you'll know the kind of thing I'm talking about. So if something winds you up, take a breath before you share and just think, do I really know that I can trust it? So those would be our top tips. What's the source? Look beyond the headline. How does it make you feel?
Thank you very much. We are pretty much out of time now. But I would like to thank very much Will and Alex from Full Fact, and of course the rest of the teams that are working incredibly hard behind the scenes. As Will has just said, if you want to find out more information about Full Fact, you can go to fullfact.org or find their social media at the handle @FullFact.